All of these financial institutions, they buy politicians. You can take this big ton of money, and then you can start to buy people. Let me tell you, it's not who's the president. It's who's controlling the wallet. So it's
And who's that?
the hedge funds, BlackRock, the banks. These guys run.
Most people today are lost and confused because they don't see the patterns.
What does chess have to do with this?
Chess can show you how this world is run, who really is in power, and how you can break that power.
Chess. I don't believe it.
There are only 6 types of people who make the modern world run.
Okay. Who's on top?
No, you need to understand who is on the bottom. Number 1, the pawns, the masses. They follow orders, they are predictable. They get sacrificed each game. Ironically, without them, there would be no game, no power, no state. They are the majority of the world. They are the basis of all power. But they are too weak to realize it.
Some realize it.
Very few go from pawn to queen.
People like Andrew Carnegie, J.K. Rowling, Jack Ma.
Jack Ma was not a pawn, but a rook when he started out.
Who really runs the world? That is what Derek Broze aims to uncover in his series, The Pyramids of Power. He says that the deep state is an overused term and oversimplified, usually leaving out the deepest of the deep state. Broze argues that the deep state has become this oversimplified catch-all, one that sort of leaves out the most entrenched and hidden forces. And he set out to map the real architecture of power in his series. A lot of times on X, we have these fights where we oversimplify things. Who is the deepest of the deep state?
They don't want to be in the news. They don't want people to talk about them. They don't want to be anywhere on the radar.
Why not?
I don't know, but I suspect it's probably because it's easier to do things when people aren't thinking about it.
Who is it when we talk about that's what they want, that's what they're doing? So tell us about the overarching project and who is the Pyramids of Power?
Yeah, thank you for that. So, I started this project actually back in 2018. It was originally a live presentation I was giving during a tour I was doing, a speaking tour. And that ended up being a 3-hour presentation, and people were kind enough to sit through it. But afterwards, I thought maybe there's a better format to present this information. I've been researching these topics for going on 16 years now. And I find that sometimes when you're first waking up, as we like to say, you consume a lot of information. And I know I did, books, documentaries, podcasts, etc. And you start to kind of form your knowledge base of what you believe about the world, what's going on. Like you said, maybe you think it's the Zionists or the globalists or different pieces of this puzzle. And I wanted to revisit my original research, things that I maybe believed before, but with time have realized, okay, it's not as accurate as I thought it was. It's not as true as I might have believed. And to really answer this question, like, is there really a group of international organizations and people that are trying to manipulate our world? That was the goal of this series, which started out as 10 episodes and now has evolved to be 17 episodes. And we basically tried to look at each of the pieces of the puzzle. As today we're focusing on the final question of who's at the top, but the series really tries to kind of walk people into that process. So the first episode is big education, then establishment media, and then big tech. And it progressively gets deeper and deeper as we go through it. And I consider this to be a true crime documentary, not a conspiracy documentary, because everything that I report in the series is factual and can be sourced to the primary source documents, to government documents, and to firsthand knowledge. And when you really start to look at that information and you do so without hyperbole and without speculation, you realize that truth is really stranger than fiction. And there's so much that we can actually prove about this, to prove that there are interlocking groups and organizations and individuals which do have an agenda which is different from what they publicly claim.
Number 2, the rook. These are the 20% of people who do 80% of the work. Long hours, efficient, diligent, straight shooters. They are like machines. But they get stuck when the routines change,
They're not flexible enough.
and they are useless on their own. They need number 3, the night. For a long time, the knights just sit there, underestimated. Then they jump over walls, surprise everyone. Nobody can predict their path, their creativity. They connect dots no one else connect.
Richard Branson, John McAfee, Kanye.
For example, they are ahead of curve. They unplug first.
They walk in uncharted terrain. One wrong step and they fall.
If you are a knight, you need a good bishop by your side.
Okay, we understand the institutions, big tech and the oil industry and all these different players that are a part of it, but who actually sits at the top? And throughout the series, familiar names come up like Rockefeller and Rothschild and the World Economic Forum
Carnegie,
and
Gates.
Carnegie,
Yeah.
Gates, these familiar names, but I still don't think that those actually point to the true power behind it. So the goal of this final conclusion is, okay, now that we understand the infrastructure of this pyramid, who's sitting at the top or what is sitting at the top? The Committee of 300 is another popular claim, the roundtable groups, and then volume 2, it's going to get maybe a little more controversial because I wanted to look at the most popular claims, which I'm sure you've seen out there on your travels on the internet, which is it's the Jesuits or it's the Freemasons. And
Yeah.
everybody's got their sort of pet group that they're certain it's them. And if you don't agree with them, then you must be a shill, you must be controlled opposition. I wanted to actually look at these claims and take them seriously. And here's what people believe, and here's what we can prove, and here's what's more speculative, and here's what we can disprove. And so, as you can imagine, it takes a lot of time and effort and digging and research. Further, I dug into these different theories and claims. I realized that in a lot of areas, there is truth. There's elements of truth in, I'd say, each of these areas, from Jesuits
Yeah.
influence to Jewish power, Zionist power, secret societies, etc. And then there's also a lot of leaps of logic, and there's a lot of assumptions, and then there's a lot of speculation that happens on the part of researchers on the internet. And my goal with this is, as I said, to make it more of a true crime series and to present the different characters. It is mostly, I would say, Western focused, not to say that other powers don't have influence. Obviously, the Chinese government is very powerful. But when you start to study the history of these movements and the Rockefellers and others, they're actually the ones who funded and helped the Chinese get as powerful as they are through Henry Kissinger and through others. And so a lot of this comes back to these same power centers, which really go back to the United Kingdom, to Europe. And, in volume 1, which you've seen, we explore this idea of the roundtable groups, which is an idea that was put forward by Carol Quigley, who was a professor at Georgetown University, and who was actually Bill Clinton's mentor. He's since deceased, but he wrote 2 books, one which was published after his death. The most famous one is called Tragedy and Hope. And it's this really epic tome, 1,000+ pages, where he was the first person to be granted access to the Council on Foreign Relations archives. And Council on Foreign Relations is another big Rockefeller-funded influential organization, which was founded in 1921. And they were spun off of a British group called the Royal Institute of International Affairs. And Carol Quigley gained access to their archives and was able to, through their own works and through their own acknowledgments, prove that this group has been influencing world affairs for at least the last 150 years. And it was interesting because he didn't necessarily agree with or disagree with them. He thought they seemed to have reasonable goals. He was quoted as saying he just wished that they would be more public, that the public deserved to know that this group was operating in the shadows. And it's interesting that the way he described that is he said that they would create an outward-facing group, so say the Council on Foreign Relations, which would have a public journal, as the Council on Foreign Relations does. It's called Foreign Affairs. But that group was actually just the outer ring representing the interests of another internal ring. And so you have this sort of series of roundtable groups, circles within circles within circles. And eventually we get a public-facing group like the Council on Foreign Relations, the World Economic Forum. And we point at those people and say, hey, Klaus Schwab's a bad guy. He's doing all these things. But in reality, based on Carol Quigley's research and his evidence, they're actually just representatives of deeper hidden power. And I think that's an important point for people to understand, that the faces we see, the names that we know, are probably not really the true power. They're just the representatives. And one other quick point, that by the end of his life, Carol Quigley did actually come to believe that there was some danger. And during his life, he was actually upset that so-called conspiracy theorists were using his book to point to secret influence. And he said, they're just taking my words out of context. And he was famously kind of calling out conspiracy theorists, saying they don't understand what they're talking about. It's not as nefarious as they're making it seem. But by the end of his life, when his second book, which is called The Anglo-American Establishment, which was published after his death, in that book, he actually writes that anybody who cares about sovereignty should not let what happened in the UK happen in their country, which is to allow small groups of men secretly running things. And it seemed like by the end of his life, he realized the danger in this. And he did name them. He said that they call themselves the Society of the Elect. And then they had another group called the Society of the Helpers, which were sort of part of their infrastructure.
Step number 1. To rule the world, you first need to control an obscene amount of money. See, money gets you to the big boys table. And when you're at the big boys table, that's where you can actually start influencing how the world works.
Anybody who wants to go into politics, they're all puppets. There are 150, and they're all men, that run the world. Period, full stop. They control most of the important assets. They control the money flows. And these are not the tech entrepreneurs. Now, they are going to get rolled over the next 5 to 10 years by the people that are really underneath pulling the strings. And when you get behind the curtain and see how that world works, what you realize is it is unfairly set up for them and their progeny. First order of business is, I want to break through and be at that table. That's the first order of business. And the way that I do that is by proving that I can do what they do as well as they do it. And then do it better than how they do it. Because at the end of the day, they are commercial animals, okay? And they'll open the door out of curiosity and they'll let me stay because I add value.
But it all starts with money.
You acquire stuff. You diversify, you acquire, you keep acquiring, you spend whatever you make in acquiring more. And at a certain point, your risk level is super low. Like, imagine you've invested in 10 different industries, from food to drinks to like technology, right? One of them fails, it doesn't matter. You have 9 others to back you up. Risk management is inherently in just about everything. And in the finance space, it's all about the money you make. You don't let it sit. You keep using it over and over, and exponential growth. You own a little bit of everything, and that little bit of everything gives you so much money on a yearly basis.
Number 4, the bishop. The bishop will protect you, and he is a quiet planner. The one who can wait with patience and a plan for months and years. And then he strikes.
Like who?
Edward Snowden, Jan Cheng-wan, Masayoshi Son.
This guy has a plan for 300 years, man.
But the bishop is nothing compared to the queen.
How organized do you think this is? That there are, so let's paint ourselves a picture that it's not Klaus Schwab or George Soros or Bill Gates, but it's someone behind them even. So these unnamed shadow figures, how organized are they if they are all over the world and in order to pull the strings? And
I think
maybe another question. What do they really want? What do they want the rest of us absolutely in their control so that they can what?
Great questions. As far as the first one, I think that there is levels of organization. Obviously, as I mentioned, the roundtable groups, the Bilderberg group, these type of meetings, these people are able to get together and sit down and have discussions. Does that mean they agree on everything all the time? I don't think so. I think that would be kind of just silly and sort of too simplistic to imagine that they're just on the same page, because this is a worldwide agenda. So you have people coming from different cultures, different languages, different backgrounds, and maybe even with their own kind of sub agendas. But what I like to tell people is that at the end of the day, this power structure is going to align with each other over the people 99 times out of 100. They will choose, even if they have their own minor differences, they're going to come together to accomplish their bigger aims. And that's just how things tend to work. That doesn't mean that there might not be, real true conflicts that happen behind the scenes. I tend to be very skeptical. Like, for example, when the news of the day is saying, Obama and Trump are having this argument, or Putin and Trump, or whatever,
Yeah.
I tend to think that some of that's just soap opera drama. Doesn't mean there can't be some real elements of it. But again, even if it is real or parts of it are real, that doesn't mean that they're going to all of a sudden turn against this infrastructure, which has put them in power. Because from what I can see, there's nobody who rises to the level of prime minister or president without having at least been approved to some degree of this. And in terms of what they want, I think that there is some level of power. Obviously, wealth is one thing, but these people, especially one of the other groups that I explore in volume 2 is what's known as the Venetian black nobility. This is another theory that a lot of people put forward, that actually at the top, the final roundtable group, if you will, is actually all of the old houses that originate from Rome, from Venice, and which realized over time that if you're a king and a queen and you're very public, you eventually get beheaded or overthrown. But if you decide to
Yeah.
kind of go to the background and you're just a celebrity royalty that nobody really pays much attention to and thinks you don't have power, you're more likely to stay in power. And there is some truth to that. When you study the land records of Europe, a lot of the actual land holdings go to these royal families, the king and queen of Netherlands, the royal houses that still exist and have existed for thousands of years. But these aren't the names that we know, Rothschild, Rockefeller, et cetera. These would be names that would probably be less, less familiar to most of us. So I do think that we're dealing with people who have an immense amount of wealth, and wealth is not the end goal for some of these folks. Maybe at the mid or lower levels, people are interested in money. I think it comes down to power. And then, of course, I do think that, as I talk about in the series, that there is a eugenicist agenda here. I do think that these people would like to reduce the population. I definitely think that that's one of the more kind of controversial final rabbit holes to go down, but I think there's an abundant evidence of that. And then I also mentioned that in the second volume, I interview people who have a wide range of opinions. So there's people who say it's the Jews, the Jesuits, the Masons, et cetera. But then there's others who say, like Mark Passio, he believes it's what he calls the dark Luciferians, that this is more of an occult kind of spiritual-ish agenda. David Icke says that, he talks about the reptilians, but even more than that, he told me he believes it's actually like a consciousness that can infect anybody and kind of takes over. And so there's others who have a little bit more esoteric beliefs about who is at the top and what is their real reason for doing so. And then I also interviewed people who have completely different answers, who don't think it's a person or an organization, but an ideology at the top, or different things like that. So I tend to think that these folks are eugenicists, and part of their goal, besides domination of the planet and the people, and goals like transhumanism, is to reduce human population.
Is it possible it's all of these things and that they are warring for power?
I definitely think that could be true. Obviously, it's hard for us to know. We don't have access to the inner workings of these different groups, and we don't know at what points they might be agreeing or disagreeing. I definitely think that's highly probable, and I think also it's likely that major world events that we see playing out in front of us on the screens are taking place for different reasons than we're told. Maybe it's some of this conflict that you mentioned there, like there's internal conflict behind the scenes, but then on the televisions and on social media, we're told a completely different reason for why certain events are happening, and that it might be due to these deeper conflicts that we're just not privy to.
Step number 2, make yourself indispensable to the governments.
Economic simulation. They need to understand the impact of something, right? They're gonna raise the interest rate, for example. It's gonna create this cascade of various factors that they're not sure what it's gonna do, basically.
Number 5.
Number 5, the Queen can strike anytime, anywhere, all directions. Everyone is afraid of the Queen.
We're the queens of this world, Andrucha. The feds, Suki.
Those who run the Suki agencies, those who run the military, those who can take you out anytime. The rules and laws of the pawns, knights, and bishops don't apply to them.
Celebrity cabals, humiliation rituals, where they have to show us what they're doing. So they do things in plain sight, and they're so, unbelievable that it's true. Sort of John Wick type, at the seat at the grand table type of thing.
I definitely do think that there is elements of that. And in chapter 16, I talk about religion and secret societies. And I think that is a component of how some secret societies operate. It's often known as revelation of the method, the idea that they have to reveal, whether for esoteric or spiritual reasons, that they have to kind of put it out in the open, and almost in a way to say, like, we're not hiding this. We're telling you exactly what we're doing. We're not, it's a sort of like the idea you have to invite the vampire into your house sort of thing. Well, we're they're putting it out in public. They're writing it in their books that nobody pays attention to. They're doing rituals, which I think most of us would believe that all the, the VMAs and all the award shows these days seem to be just open rituals. And I think in their mind, it's like, we're not hiding it. We're showing them exactly what we're doing, and the public's just too stupid to get it, or, they just don't understand it. So I definitely think there's some components of that the truth has to be put out there for one reason or another. And it could just be as simple as they're mocking us or laughing in our faces. You have to ask these questions when you see different Hollywood films that come out, which like are blatant propaganda. And, we've seen the increase in the last year or two and during COVID of movies talking about Contagion or movies talking about Civil War. It's like, this is also, I think these two ideas go hand in hand: revelation of the method as well as predictive programming, trying to seed these certain ideas and concepts into the minds of the masses in order for them to engineer the outcomes that they want. And in the Pyramid of Power, I do have an episode on Hollywood and the infiltration of Hollywood by the intelligence agencies. And I mean, I think it's clear there's abundant evidence that they seed movies, whether it's for pro-military agendas or other things like that. And I'm sure there's even deeper layers to that obviously we are not aware of. And we're not the first ones to talk about this. There's been people like Dave McGowan and others who've written books over the last couple of decades pointing to the influence of not just Hollywood, but the music industry. And of course, people have written and talked about the gangster rap industry and how that was specifically created to seed a message and to promote certain ideas. So I think we all understand the power of music. We understand the power of film as a medium and how these things can be. We kind of feel like, I have similar stories of what you're describing, singing certain songs when you're younger, and looking back, you're like, well, I guess I made it through okay, but how did that shape my young life? I'm listening to all kinds of music when I was younger that was definitely not a positive message and was feeding into some of the chaotic things I was feeling as a teenager. And, I find myself wondering, did that come from the music, or did the music make it worse? Or, which came first, like them feeding me these horrible messages or something like that. And I definitely think it's things we need to be skeptical of and careful with, especially with the young minds. The more we're aware that what we put in our bodies is important and in our minds. And
I'll give an example. Russia blows up Ukraine's grain silos. Price of wheat's gonna go mad up. So what are you gonna do if you're a trading firm? The moment that news hits, within a millisecond, you're gonna pump trades into whoever the wheat suppliers are, into their stocks. Within an hour or two, that stock goes up, and then you sell, and you just made, I don't know, however many mil. This is fantastic if you're trading. Volatility creates opportunity to make profit. War is real good for business. It's exciting when goes wrong, right?
Why is the king in power, not the queen? The king is just in the back rows, small steps. Nobody fears him. Why does he hold the power?
Legacy. Queens have their power for a few decades. Kings and their families have their power for centuries.
So who are the kings of this world in Bruja?
The families that cannot be named. They have trillions, but don't show up in the Forbes list. Money does not matter to them because they print it. Everyone is playing chess, but they are the ones who provide the board. They decide how many fields the board has and how long the game will be played. It's their game, and it's hard to exit. But there is a way.
Win every match.
No, you only win if you don't play.
But how?
You stop paying. You stop playing. It's all run by money. Consume, produce, taxes. If you stop the money flow, the game stops. And someday, someone who has stopped playing and has walked away from the game will come back and flip the board. Game over for all the kings and all their Suki helpers.
Game over for the game.
Honor will come.
You take the red pill, and then you're mad at all the lies that you have debunked for yourself that you bought before. Then you take the black pill and you're pissed because you're like, everything's screwed. All the wrong people are in charge. And then you take a white pill and you have some kind of faith in a higher power that it's going to be okay. I think I'm probably somewhere in between black and white. I'm not sure what my white pill is because I feel like I'm constantly breaking down my own knowledge, which Socrates said is the key to wisdom, right? So, where would you say is you are? And if you have a white pill, what's it made of? Is it a certain faith or something else?
Yeah, so you reminded me of a term called apocalyptimist that I've become familiar with recently, and it kind of describes a person, which I think is maybe where you were at, and sometimes where I'm at, where you kind of see that the world is going to crap, but you also have an understanding or faith that things are going to turn out okay. And I feel like that's where I'm at. I'm definitely not black pilled. I've been accused of being black pilled quite a bit over the last year, especially around election time for pointing out things that some people didn't want to hear. But I don't consider myself black pilled. I don't consider myself a doomer. Despite everything that I report on and everything in this series, I don't think that things are hopeless. And in fact, again, that's where the series kind of ends on that optimism. My white pill is recognizing that despite all the corruption that exists, not only in the US government, but in governments around the world, and I think government as an institution itself, despite that, I have faith in the people and you and me and just the average person, not in politicians, not in heroes or saviors that are put before us, but in the average person to recognize their innate sovereignty, to recognize that they are powerful, they are beautiful, and they are free, and that if we come together, we can make it through this. I definitely think there's going to be difficult, dark times ahead that will require, I think, a rethinking of our lifestyles and our decisions in order to stay free and to maintain privacy and liberty. But I do have faith, and part of that faith does come from my belief in a creator, that I believe that I'm on this planet right now, as well as yourself and everybody else hearing this, for a very important reason. And I know that the work I do every day is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. So I don't know how it all turns out, but I'm an apocalyptimist, and I know things are going to be okay.
Yeah.